If you're watching this, you've probably known what it's like to be alone. Maybe not the kind of silence where only wind and coyotes answer back, but the deeper kind. The kind that clings to your ribs and makes you forget what it's like to be looked at like you matter. That was Hank Mallister's life on the edge of the New Mexico desert. But everything changed one bitter January night. A broken bar when 10 Apaches appeared outside his gate, asking for shelter. Before we get into what happened next, take a second to hit that like button if you've ever believed that one memento just an ear can change a man's life forever. And subscribe, because stories like these aren't just tales of a broken bar, they're reminders of who we still have the chance to become. Now, let me take you back. Hank Mallister wasn't always alone. Once, the Mallister ranch had the echo of laughter in its fields, the smell of cornbread in the kitchen, and a woman's voice calling him in from the cold. That woman was May, his wife. His fire. She'd passed 7 years back, after a sickness swept through town and took her before Hank even realized she was fading. Her death cracked him down the middle. And when their only son, Jesse, left for California 2 years later and never came back, Hank stopped waiting for anything or anyone. He had horses, chickens, and 2 aging border collies who were too tired to herd anything anymore. His days were measured in chores and sunsets. His nights were filled with stars and silence. People in town stopped checking on him after a while. Rumor had it Hank had gone strange, that he talked to his windmill, that he hadn't cut his beard since the fire that took the barn. But the truth was, Hank just didn't see the point in small talk anymore, not when everyone he loved was in the past. Then came the winter of '79, the coldest anyone could remember. Snow drifted thick against the canyon walls, and even the jackrabbits went quiet. One night, as Hank sat in his kitchen sharpening his knife, the dogs began to growl low, not the bark of coyotes or raccoons but a deep, uncertain sound. Hank grabbed his rifle, pulled on his coat, and stepped out into the storm. There, standing just beyond the flicker of his lantern, were 10 Apaches, men, women, and 2 children, all of them wrapped in threadbare blankets, shivering from the wind. Their leader stepped forward, a tall, gaunt, but proud. "My name is Nanton," he said, voice hoarse. "We don't mean harm. We were heading south, got caught in the storm, need shelter for the night." Every part of Hank bristled with instinct. In his younger days, he'd ridden with posses, fought in border disputes, and carried more prejudice in his gut than he cared to admit. But there was something in Nanton's eyes, something tired, something humaner that reminded Hank of a man he might have become under different skies. He didn't say a word, just nodded and opened the barn door. They made fires in the stalls. Hank brought down old quilts, made hot bins and flatbread on the cast iron. The silence between them all was thick, but not angry, just wary. He watched them eat like it was the first warm food in days. The children smiled at his dogs. One of the women at Ella, he learned, had attended to the cracked feet of an elder who hadn't spoken since they arrived. Over the next few days, the storm worsened. Leaving wasn't an option. Roads were buried. Hank made room in the hay loft, brought out extra coats, and even played his old fiddle one night by the stove. And something unexpected happened. He started talking again. Not all at once, but little stories here and there about May and Jesse, about the time he broke his leg chasing a bull, or how the wind sounded different before a dust storm. They listened, really listened, no judgment, no pity, just ears open, hearts quiet. Tala told him her story in return, how the government promised land and then took it, how her brother died in a mining camp explosion, how they'd been moving since fall, seeking a place to survive the winter without more death. Nanton said little, but when he did, it carried weight. He'd seen war, lost half his people to smallpox and betrayal, but he'd never begged, never stolen. They carried their dignity like old warriors. The 5th night, the eldest Apache called Kuna fell ill. Fever hit hard. Tala had run out of herbs. Hank knew what death smelled like. It was on Kuna's breath. And in that moment, something in him rose. Not duty, not pity, but the urge to fight for someone again. He saddled his horse before dawn and rode to town. The townsfolk watched him like a ghost. When he asked Doc Harris for supplies, the old man narrowed his eyes. "Who's sick?" "An Apache elder," Hank said flatly. On your land? Yes. You are to be careful who you bring in. Hank leaned in close, voice like gravel. If you're not gonna help, say it plain. But don't stand there and tell me who deserves to live. Doc didn't argue. He handed over quinine, blankets, and broth mix. Hank rode back through snow, feeling something break loose in his chest. Kuna survived. Slowly. By the 7th day, she was sitting up, sipping broth, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. When the thaw came a week later, Nanton gathered his people to leave. Hank stood at the gate, hat in hand. You saved us, Nanton said. You didn't have to. Hank shook his head. You brought life back to this place. I didn't know how empty it was until you filled it. The youngest child, a boy named Kai, ran up and hugged Hank around the legs. The dogs barked joyfully, and for the first time in years, Hank smiled so wide his face ached. As they rode out, Tala turned once, hand raised in farewell. She said something in Apache. Later, Hank would learn it meant, you are our king now. The ranch never went silent again. Not really. Birds nested near the barn. Deer returned to the creek. And sometimes, when spring wind blew just right, Hank would swear he heard laughter on the breeze. He wrote letters to Jesse again, even rode into town once a month to share coffee and trade stories. He built a bench by the cottonwood tree out back and carved into it, where strangers became family. If this story stirred something in the broken by a memory, a hope, or just the reminder that we're all better when we share what little warmth we have here, click that like button, and subscribe for more stories that remind us who we really are when the storm comes knocking. Because sometimes, the loneliest ranch can become a sanctuary.